name is Grace Siegelman. I'm the Digital Engagement Manager and Feminist Foreign Policy Coordinator here at CODEPINK. I'm so excited that you guys are all here for Anti-Imperialist Feminism from values to practice, from values to practice. I just want to re-say that you should be introducing yourselves in the chat, name, where you're from, pronouns, maybe a fun fact about yourself. Please keep it in the chat. We'd love if you all stay muted for at least the presentation part of this. We will have a discussion later where you can unmute, you can talk in the chat, you can talk to each other. But for this duration, please stay muted. Also, we are recording this. So if you do not want your video or your spoken comments recorded, keep your camera off and your comments in the chat, and then it won't stay on the recording. And again, another reminder to stay muted. We will have that time to discuss and put our values into action. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Grace. I'm super excited to be here with you all. We felt the need to have this webinar and another webinar coming up next week that we'll talk about. Like Grace said, it's from values to practice. CODEPINK is a feminist-led anti-imperialist organization that started sort of in response to the co-optation of feminism. How the warmongers and the political elite were trying to manufacture consent for the invasion of Afghanistan first and then Iraq. So they were saying, like we need to liberate women in those countries. But we, as not a Western feminist, but a feminist organization in the West, said, wars actually don't help women, it kills women. And we are seeing that co-optation right now, and it is strong, and we wanted to give you all the resources that you need to resist that co-optation. And so what values to practice does is we have all these values as feminists, as anti-imperialist feminists, and we want to talk about what that means and how we actually implement it in our daily lives and organizing lives. A lot of you are in CODEPINK chapters, and we can practice our feminist values interpersonally and in our CODEPINK chapters, because I think one really key component of that is it does prevent us from sort of getting swept up into the co-optation. Because we'll talk about it in the session, but we'll talk about solidarity, we'll talk about curiosity, we'll talk about openness. And when we're practicing those things in our daily lives and in our politic, like if we're practicing true solidarity, it makes it really, really hard to exclude women in the global South or the struggles of anyone in the global South. For example, like mainstream Democrats not caring about Palestine or Palestinian women because they're focused on reproductive justice or quote unquote reproductive justice. But what does it mean when they don't actually care about the reproductive justice of women in Palestine? And we're sort of operating from the perspective that women in the United States, and people in the United States that aren't part of the political elite have a lot more in common with women in Palestine than we do with people like Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, and all these warmongering women who are touted as feminists. So we hope to cover a few things. Michelle, if you could start screen sharing the presentation. We have our three presenters. It'll be myself, Grace, and Jasmine. Jasmine will lead the discussion portion at the end. If we could go to the next slide, that's us. Those are our faces. And then the next slide after that. So what we'll cover is Grace is going to cover anti-imperialist feminism. What is it and what it's not. I'll cover our values, curiosity, openness, and solidarity. Then Jasmine will lead a session on how to talk about feminism today and practicing your values. And then we'll do some closing and things that you can take as next steps. So I'll pass it over to Grace.
Awesome. Yeah, if we could, here, let me spotlight myself. We go to the next slide. Cool. Yeah. So my portion is all about what is anti-imperialist feminism? What is feminism in general? as we go through my slides, we'll kind of learn that that is really a question that we are not asking ourselves. We are not worried about a definitive answer to what feminism is. We're more really caring about what feminism looks like and how we can show up for each other in an anti-imperialist, anti-war, genocidal way, for that matter. So next slide. So we're going to dive in, lots going on here. We're going to dive in to a little bit of the history and just this historical pattern of feminism being co-opted, and then the history of what actual feminism, actual anti-imperialist feminism is, and how we see time and time again it being co-opted by the war machine. There has been this history of feminist co-optation to write women in as, you know, the gem of the nation state, the reason we must go to war, and we must.
Ow!
Oh, if we could
Shine
all
just
stay,
felt like
we could all stay muted, that would be amazing. You're muted on entry, so please stay muted. But we can peek into the beginnings, as Danica said, of Code Pink for reference of this. Jody Evans, Medea Benjamin, and other peace activists started Code Pink as this response to the looming and eventual real US invasion of Iraq. Feminism was co-opted to explain the necessity for this invasion, that only the US and with US soldiers on the ground could liberate Iraqi women and children. And what we really saw, the effect of this was over 15,000 Iraqi women murdered. And this rescue narrative that we have seen play out in Iraq and Afghanistan, Yemen, Palestine, and across the globe by imperial players like the US, Great Britain, Saudi Arabia, and Israel has truly shown the lengths that liberal Western feminism will go to justify the oppression of the women and children that it claims to save. As I said at the beginning, feminism is not definitive. It's not one size fits all. And to define feminism is to be inherently anti-feminist, as we're building new ways to be feminist and to show up for our community every day. However, co-opting these values and these practices to enact harm and destruction to peoples and the planet is against all feminist praxis and principles. Feminism at its heart is against all forms of war, policing, and oppression. And to deny our support to Palestinians or to any oppressed peoples, to see them as inferior and as in need of saving, is to deny ourselves the right to be called feminists at all. As I said, we do not assume a fake sense of superiority over women based on the realities and false realities that have been caused by imperial efforts. And we very much know that the harm and terror that the US causes to millions of people around the world in the name of fake feminism has its deathly effects right here at home. The gluttonous defense budget takes away billions of dollars for that we could be used for life-affirming necessities that we need here in the US, like education, housing, healthcare, not to mention that the money that we do have left does not even come close to being used to support those needs. They instead go into criminalizing and imprisoning marginalized communities and producing the largest incarcerated population in the entire world. Feminist education. Oh, please stay muted. Thank you so much. Feminist education, activism, and community care must always come from a place of love and understanding, but must also be situated in these steadfast values of abolition and divestment from militarism, from policing, from surveillance. And we cannot let ourselves be co-opted to kill Palestinians. We cannot allow our work to be undermined, to kill the people of Congo, of Sudan, of Yemen, of Ukraine, of Russia. And we must not let our lives and our choices be tied to a small, small group of people reaping the benefits of war. No one's reaping the benefits of war. With all of this destruction and murder and genocide, it's destroying our planet. With that, we can go to the next slide. Thank you so much. And with this love for all peoples comes, like I said, for the love that that we have in our home, for the place that we call home, for this earth. We cannot justify the destruction of our planet for murder. We cannot justify the pain and the death of other women, men, and children. And we cannot look away from these facts and look away from the abuse that we see here in our own streets, the militarism that is right here in the belly of the beast. Here I just have some statistics on how climate change, gender-based violence, and policing all is used in this co-optation of Western neoliberal, carceral, capitalistic feminism. And there's real effects that we see every single day to the women and children and mothers and communities and entire family lines that feminism, fake feminism claims to support, and to the earth that it claims to support. It cannot be feminism if it justifies war, war being the greatest contributor to climate change in history. We can go to the next slide. So this is just a little bit, like we're saying, it's not definitive, but there are so many things that make up what feminism is, and it's so many things that we see every day from our chapters and from organizers, both here in the US and throughout the world. And these all are under the umbrella that we hold so true to ourselves, to this anti-imperialistic feminist praxis that we practice every single day. That includes environmental justice, disability justice, divestment from war, local peace economies everywhere, education, transnational feminism, decolonial feminism. This is all under the practice that we are looking and we are building every single day. It's not definitive. It is growing, and it is making new versions and new realities and new forms of liberation in small ways every single day that is leading to the liberation of us and all peoples. You can go to the next slide. And to close out my section and to bring us into what Danaka will be talking about along our values, I just wanted to leave us with that the war economy was never built. The war economy meaning militarism, war, greed, capitalism, all of these things that are funneling into climate catastrophe, systems of policing and imprisonment and criminalization. None of this was built to support the wants and the dreams of all peoples, and we know this. It was built to build. Thank you so much. It was built to build power and death. And I want to end my section with this quote from Nadine, who will be on next week, next Tuesday. She was writing about feminism and why Palestine is a feminist issue. And she gives us this honestly heartbreaking quote that reads, "And how might feminist theorizations of the body grapple with a woman who deploys the body as a weapon against an unstoppable military machine?" And I feel like this quote truly meets us where we are as anti-war, anti-imperialist feminist organizers. We cannot simply theorize about a feminist future, about the liberation of all peoples. We must do the work every day to ensure that our loved ones see that freedom. And that's so much of the work that we see you all doing every single day, showing how Palestine is directly connected to our lives, to our education, to our housing, to our employment. And imperialist, capitalist, money-grabbing warmongers who take money from pro-Israel lobbies or vote to suppress BDS for more money for cops and criminalization, they don't understand this kind of work because they don't understand that what you do every single day and what you do for work, what you do for education, what you do to take care of your family, that comes from love. And that can come from anger when you see that the people that you love aren't being treated well. So I just wanted to end with that quote. And again, through my slides, I've had these wonderful visuals of anti-imperialist organizers and artists. And I will pass it to Danaka in the next slide.
Thank you, Grace. That was super helpful. So now we're going to talk about how we practice these values like right now. Because if you're going to run a marathon, like let's say the revolution happens in like a year, we have like, and then we have no practice of what the world we're trying to build. That's not very helpful and not useful. And we can think of practicing our values, our feminist values, in our organizing spaces as sort of an inroad for a better future in the world that we're trying to create together. So I'm going to go over a few. I don't have time to talk all the feminist values, but I think there are some that don't get enough enough highlighting. And I think these are ones that we can really start practicing like today. And I hope that they'll be useful for you all in your organizing spaces. So to talk about curiosity, openness, and solidarity. So first I'm going to talk about curiosity. If I can go to the next slide. This was something I went to the Through the Portal conference in Chicago a few weeks ago, and we talked about curiosity as a feminist value on one of the feminist panels. And I had actually not really heard about it talked in like feminist spaces a ton. So I was really, really floored and interested in the practice and like in organizing and like practicing curiosity with one another. So just some examples of what it means is like asking questions, inquiring further, not assuming things of the people you organize with or the people that you meet in organizing spaces. Especially don't assume something's true and then talk shit because gossip like actually like it ruins organizations. So practicing that curiosity first before assuming things of people is super, super important. Curiosity is like the first step at critical thinking. So it's super, super, super useful to use in our organizing spaces. Be curious about each other, find out people's talents, what people are passionate about, what their lives are like. It makes us more understanding of each other if we know that someone we organize with is really good at graphic design and really loves doing graphic design. Then we know like that's our graphic designer for our chapter, for our organization, you know, because people feel cared for and motivated when they're able to practice the talents that they do have. And you're not necessarily going to pick up on those things if you're not being curious about the people that you organize with. And if you're curious about what's going on in their lives, we're more understanding of what their capacity is, or how emotionally available they might be, or how much they're able to give in an organizing space. And we do kind of have to like take care of each other and practice that sort of emotional intelligence. Being curious can prevent us from thinking we're right all the time. It gives us humility and puts us in the headspace for learning and care. This helps us practice the values we want the world to embrace. And I want to touch on this first part a little bit more. Being curious can prevent us from thinking we are right all the time. I know if you are an organizer, you have seen people take up too much space in a planning meeting where they're just yapping, yapping, yapping and not like letting anyone else talk. It's really important for us to like constantly check in with our humility and like make sure other people are able to talk and like ask questions that we like might if we think we're the smartest person in the room, we're not asking. Because it's really important that we learn from one another and that like, we're constantly like in sort of a student position, where we're constantly learning from one another and learning from the movement, and learning how to be better. So next slide. This is a quote I found. Feminist curiosity is rooted in companionship with self and others, reorients time, a visionary future, but also a material past and present, and resists oppressive forms of inquiry such as specularization and the presumptions of access. As such, feminist curiosity is committed not only to a relational world, but to a relational investigation of that world. So like I said, it's important to like practice the kindness we want the world to treat us with each other first. It's called prefigurative politics, practicing our values before we are able to accomplish that world that we're thinking of. Because if we can't practice it with each other, it's not the world that we're going to be able to build. Next slide. Next is openness. We wanted to talk about this because after November, there might be a lot of people who are looking for a political home or an organizing home because they might be disillusioned by how the election goes. Either way it goes, there's going to be people who are disillusioned. And I think we can operate from the assumption a lot of people struggle in one way or another, whether it's like having healthcare or reliable access to housing, or just like the stress that capitalism puts you under, whether it's right now, whether it's like years from now. Um, and so we can operate under the assumption that a lot of people have baseline compassion and care, and at some point they might be moved to be part of like our greater feminist anti-war movement or in any movement space that we are. So it's important we are open-minded with people who are just coming into the movement. If after November, someone who wasn't in the streets for Palestine joins us, we want them to be welcome in our movement and not be condescending that they didn't get here sooner. We all have a huge arc of political socialization that leads us to the stances we have. And if you think of how long your arc was to get from point A to point B, it may have been years, it may have been months. So it's important to be open-minded, but also, of course, hold our values. We're not like compromising on any of these issues. Just being open-minded and gentle with people who are coming into the movement for the first time and being patient and explaining things to them and teaching. This can look like practicing patience with new people, like I said, not acting like they're the smartest person in the room, another practice that value. Understanding that people are coming into the movement with their own experiences, and we're all super different from one another. We have different communication styles, we have different struggles, we have different time constraints, we have different family situations. Some of us have kids, some of us are caretakers of our parents or partners, and so that's something to be open-minded about too. Being willing to teach without being condescending, like I said, and not isolating people without trying to teach or repair, or bringing up an issue first and trying to work it out with them. And if it's not worked out, then you move on to the next thing. But not shutting people out is super important. Next slide. Why is openness a feminist value? Openness is a feminist value because our movement is interested in bringing people into the movement, not making people feel like they're not welcome. What I like to say is you can either care about being right before everyone else, or you can care about winning the better world that we want. Next slide. Last point I'll talk about, something, like I said, all three of these things that we can start practicing yesterday, today. One is solidarity. So if we live inside the belly of the beast in the US or North America, the oppression from our tax dollars touches every inch of the earth. So should our care and solidarity. The women of Palestine should not be left out of our idea of a better world. They need to be included in it, and part of the conversation. And if every struggle is connected, then our feminist practice must be rooted in solidarity. Next slide. Here's a couple examples of solidarity: giving a fellow organizer a ride home. You could do that whenever you guys have a meeting. Showing up for other orgs that work on different issues where you live. So maybe it's not your org, but someone that you want to be in solidarity with, a struggle you want to be in solidarity with, showing out to support them. Sharing resources with one another. Hey, I learned this. I think this might be helpful for you. Constantly drawing connections between struggles, constantly reflecting on them, building relationships between orgs, like meaningful relationships. Getting coffee with a fellow organizer from a different organization is solidarity. Providing emotional support to fellow organizers who might be having a hard time. And I would love for people to be in the chat. What are some other examples of solidarity? And I'll give people a minute and I'll read them out. Examples of solidarity. Showing appreciation for people's work. Yeah, that's great, Cynthia. People put a lot of effort and work into the movement, like just being like, hey, you're doing a great job, or I appreciate the work that you're doing. I know it takes a lot of effort. Hosting a fundraiser at your place of work, worship, or school, making sure your friends get home safe. So true. Do that all the time. Skill sharing, connecting people in your org to resources they might need, letters of support, like for people who are incarcerated, perhaps. That's a great example. Moving furniture for new organization spaces, so true. Oh, Jared, I know you've practiced that with all power books. Um, Bringing someone a meal or food, helping relieve caregivers, teaching and mobilizing your base about other issues they might not know about. Um, Ensuring your members' basic needs are met. True. Those are all great examples. So you've all come up with a large list that we can all start as soon as possible, so that's great. I'm gonna pass it over to Jasmine. I think those are all my slides. Thank
Yeah, thank you so much, Danica and Grace, for getting started. I hope folks are understanding kind of the focus of this tonight's like webinar training and what we're really getting into, right? Why do we keep, um, knocking in this point of how we treat each other is most important, right? It's a couple of reasons, right? For one, we're obviously in a place right now where we deeply need to change minds. So many of us, depending on where we are and where we've been organizing, we recognize that how we've started to build an echo chamber. We can recognize when we're only talking to the folks who already agree with us, right? And we need to move beyond the folks who already agree with us in order to build the people power we actually need, right? We all also need to be pushed sometimes, right? Every single person in this room is constantly further radicalized by the more they know, the more stories of other people they're told, right? The more experience they have, right? So we're constantly going back to the basic values of feminism because it's all about how are we making our movement irresistible, right? How are we making it irresistible to want to become a change maker and want to become a part of the movement to free us in all of our connected struggles, right? It's important that we never forget the basics of talking to people, having difficult conversations, bringing people onto our side, right? So much of our work is creating critical consciousness. It's bringing folks out of numbness, out of inaction, out of that's not my problem, not my business, right? Into being as passionate and willing as we all are to fight for the world that we want, right? So we're going back to these basics of how do we like create this world that we actually want to see, because that's how we move, right? This, like Danica said, no matter which direction this election goes, most of our work for those of us who are here remains the same, right? We have the same goal, right? CODEPINK has been pushing to an end to war, to US imperialism, right, for over 20 years. There have been so many who have been doing so for longer than we have, right? So no matter who's in office, we are still changing minds. We have a harder job if folks fall into a level of complacency, right? If folks think that we put the right candidate in office and therefore the work is over, right? That's something we have to push back on, and we have to know how to have those conversations, right? We keep explicitly stating that we are anti-imperialist feminists and we are pushing our fellow feminists to be anti-imperialist feminist, right? Because it's really important that we're not leaving anybody behind, right? Like Grace mentioned. And in order to do that, we often do have to change the mind of our siblings, like Danica said, who understand the importance of one issue but not the other, who don't quite yet understand how they're implicated in global issues, right? That's the work that we all have to do. So I say all that to say, right? Again, the basics is difficult conversations. I am someone who can be anti-confrontational, who has a lot of anxiety, who oftentimes hates talking to someone, like when I see that we have a deep disagreement, but I charge into it anyway, right? Because who's going to do that work if not us, right? We'd rather folks be radicalized in our direction than in the opposite direction, right? So what we're going to do next, I'm going to like kind of pose a couple of examples slash scenarios, and I would love if a couple people would like to share how they might approach this situation. This is a literal moment to practice how do we have conversations with real folks that we meet out in the world, right? To where we're practicing the values that Danica just shared of openness and curiosity, right? So the first question I want to, or prompt I want to pose, and I'm also going to drop it in the chat. Folks are welcome to share how they might start this conversation in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand and come off mute and maybe say how you would start this conversation, or where you would go with it, or what your goal would be, right? So say your longtime friend has posted a couple of, vague Instagram stories about, references to the hostages, right? Quote unquote, from a kind of big three news company that doesn't get really specific. And They make kind of vague references to peace in the world, right? But they haven't actually engaged more about learning about Palestine, right? You've never seen them look beyond a kind of Fox News article, right? So you can, from an outside perspective, kind of see that they're only getting a limited perspective, right? And when you try to talk to them, they insist that it's complicated, right? That's why they haven't learned more and that it doesn't concern them very much. I can see in the chat already. Many of us have faced this exact scenario, right? Someone we know either a year ago or today, we might have various levels of like, how don't you know? Why don't you know? Right. But someone has to be the one to have those conversations, right? So I'd love to open the floor if anyone either has an example of what's worked really well in the past when they've tried to approach this conversation with someone or how they might like to begin. I love already what was shared in the chat by Nazareth that my first point would be to ask if they know that they're misinformed. I also love to ask this question to folks, right? People might not take well to, well, that's a lie, but you can ask them, where did you get that source from? Where did you learn that? Right? And then we can talk. It kind of might feel like you're going in circles to step back and talk about media literacy, but that is what it is a lot of times, right? Did you know that that source that you're quoting isn't actually accurate, right? How about these other articles and resources that I can share? How about you read those and see if you come to a different conclusion, right? That's a great entry point. Where'd you learn that? Do you know that that's not necessarily true? I love that. See, Sam mentioned that in person or via message, they'd share nuggets or seeds of information, right? That's always really helpful. Those folks that you don't let go, you send them the Instagram posts and the articles anyway, right? Understanding that they'll get to it when they can. I love that. Anybody else? Hands raised. You're welcome to chat. Oh, Danica, you said you'd share if nobody wants to.
Yeah, one thing I've done with my family or like certain family members specifically is like if they say something vague about, I think they're coming from like a mainstream media angle, I just like genuinely approach them like super non-judgmentally so they don't go on the defense immediately. So I'll be like, oh, I heard this, this, and this. Like, I heard, like prior to October 7th, like, there's a whole fence like built around Gaza, and there's like 2 million people there. Like, if I couldn't leave, I'd be incredibly upset. And I just like can't imagine myself living under those conditions. Could you? And I'll kind of like just like repose the question to them and sort of like just like speaking in I statements is super important, especially with family and like not putting them in a position where they feel like especially family members get defensive really quick. So like putting them in a position where they like can't get defensive immediately, I think has worked for me in the past.
I love that. That's really practicing curiosity, right? Trying to get a sense of where you're coming from that. But also, yeah, remembering that it is our responsibility to lean into our relationships, right? I know there's a big spectrum of I disagree with my family so deeply that it's not even safe to be around them, right? But for a lot of us, we're not quite there. We're somewhere on this end of the spectrum. And as those closest to them, right, we are the ones most able to change their minds, right? We are the ones who recognize what positions of power they're in. If you can convince your grandma who's a principal of her school, right? To think differently or to change their mind. Imagine that trickle down power that has for what's allowed in her school, where her children might be able to learn, right? We are the most able, I love that, Nazareth, most able and most responsible for talking to those closest to us. So I love that kind of approach and remembering that we don't want folks to get defensive. I saw someone else mentioning letting folks know that their DMs are always open and a safe space to learn without judgment. That's huge, right? Knowing I'm a big advocate of reminding folks that we're allowed to change our minds. We're allowed to change our minds. We're allowed to take in new information and be like, hey, actually, I was wrong, right? And so making sure your community knows that you're someone they can come to when they've changed their mind or they're ready to learn, that's really huge. Anybody want to share aloud how they might approach this conversation? Yeah, Prairie.
Um, I guess kind of, pardon me, I guess kind of similarly to what Danica said, I like to do the seed planting, but also maybe relate to things that I know people struggle with here, you know. So I mean, I'm in North Dakota, it's a stand your ground state, you know, so I can, you know, definitely bring that into conversation when it comes to resistance elsewhere. And yeah, like groceries and all of the things that people struggle with currently. I think a lot of people, regardless of their political stance, realize that things are out of hand. So kind of trying to bring those things up in regards to like the Pentagon failing audits. So yeah, I think bringing up, trying to be relatable, like humanizing myself and the person I'm talking to, and then also people elsewhere.
I really love that. Yeah, using what you know they will find relatable. I think that's so real, to be honest, for folks living in a standard ground state, or you know that the people around you take pride in this idea of being able to defend yourself, right? That is a great place to start a conversation, right? Because it is a larger conversation about who gets to use violence with impunity, right? Which nations and states, and who gets criminalized, right, for violence of resistance and a violence of self-defense and survival, right? Obviously very complicated conversations that we hope folks are having ongoing, but those are really great entry points that not only are helpful for explaining and talk about Palestine, but for talking about all the places that the US or other Western countries are invading, right? For example, Haiti. If you are falling apart, right, because of years of imperialism, do you want a military's help to come and help things out, or do you want diplomacy? Do you want support and aid, right? How does anybody respond to someone coming in and invading them and taking their homes and saying that you must live under our rule, right? There's so many parallels out there that we can draw. So I love that. Laura, did you want to share?
Mute here. One of the things that I've been organizing for a long, long time, and a number of years, there's two instances that I use as an example in these kinds of discussions. One of which was I was organizing family members and loved ones of prisoners who were incarcerated under mandatory minimum drug laws in Michigan. And we had in Michigan, about 4,000 plus members, mostly women, mostly from urban areas. And I was asked to talk to a NOW chapter about an issue, and they were complaining about they couldn't attract women of color. And I said, you really have to think about what people are going through in their lives and the oppression that they're trying to deal with. And I talked about the fact that we had a very large organization of women doing this work, incarceration work and reform work, and they weren't very receptive to that idea. And I think that one of the things is that it's easy for people to assume how you should, that people should come to you on the basis of your own ideas versus understanding what's really moving them in their lives and what oppression that they're experiencing. And that there are people out there in motion, but the forms of the motion, the needs and priorities may not be the ones that you would identify first. So you have to be with folks where they're at. And I'm proud to say that we were able to do a lot of major reforms, and it was because of both the power of people who were involved in these organizations, united with the prisoners inside organizations, inside prisons. And so that I just want to leave that because that had a profound impact on me, that people couldn't hear this because they had their definition of feminism.
Thank you so much for sharing, Laura. I think what you just shared is an amazing example, right, of solidarity. What does it actually mean to connect our movements? Not to just say, you know, free XYZ country where we're chanting, right? What does it look like to be showing tangible solidarity? Make sure that we're incorporating issues for identities and communities we don't share, right, into our demands, right? How are we building a feminism that isn't a very narrow white middle class Western feminism, right? But one that does not leave behind anybody anywhere. I think that's a great example of how do you actually move the people that you're organizing with and be like, hey, you might have a blind spot. Let us work with you to make sure that we're covering this blind spot and not leaving behind people in our own community. Great example. Ivana, did you want to share?
Cool. Hi, yes. So my strategy may not be for everyone. You mentioned how you don't like confrontational situations. I am totally the opposite. I actually am very comfortable in confrontational situations because sometimes I have seen where, like, for example, people have seen me do things that are where I'm making a mistake and people didn't say anything because it was easier for them not to confront me and would see me fail. And so having experienced that many times, I now have a completely different approach and I'm just in a different line of work where I can do that. But anyways, I've had several conversations with my friends. Some of them are Jewish, where they would tell me that they, for example, feel sorry for Ukrainians, but don't feel sorry for Palestinians. And some of them consider themselves highly spiritual. I live in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica. It's like a mecca of new age spirituality and so on. And so I have this friend where I have basically said to her really directly, my friends say that I'm a straight shooter, that basically, you know, she's basically a racist. And, you know, that she's harboring something that's called, you know, white internalized supremacy, racism, you know, because she can't be made uncomfortable by talking about Palestinians. And then she's also, we're all part of these like bhakti community where we like sing to Hindu gods, even though I'm an atheist. But basically I said to her, you know, you're just flattering yourself. You're literally indulging yourself thinking that you're spiritual and that you're transcending something and that you are, you know, magnanimous and so amazing. You're not. You're really not. Like if you think that Ukrainians deserve your compassion and Palestinians do not, you are a pure racist. So let's just get that out. I mean, and I said other things, but she was absolutely shocked. And I had this conversation with 3 more friends like that. And people are really taken aback because here in the United States, very rarely people talk like that to their friends and someone they like so directly and very confrontational and very borderline aggressively. And so she came back and she texted this particular woman and she texted back and she said, just so you know, I think Benjamin Netanyahu is a monster. I mean, again, you know, she didn't like leap to the other side, but there's like incremental adjustment, you know, where she was absolutely, you know, a Zionist and now she's like willing to accept, you know, there's lots of problem there, we all understand, but that's also another way of really just making people very directly, aggressively uncomfortable and telling them, like serving them the truth. And I understand this is really not everyone's cup of tea. So thanks so much, everyone.
I think I saw so many impressed faces when you were talking, because we all love that directness. And I think you're so right that, again, like I mentioned, when you know your relationships best, you know what folks receive better, right? And we absolutely do have a problem with passive aggression, right? In this, we have a whole training here at CODEPINK about direct communication because we are inherently not taught how to communicate with folks directly, right? We're taught to walk around issues. There's this wonderful white supremacy chart that I like to share with people all the time. I'll maybe include it in the follow-up email that shares how a lot of traits often that show up in kind of professional spaces in the guise of professionalism are really rooted in this idea of what is normal, what is okay, what is acceptable kind of behavior in existence, and passive aggression and kind of avoiding the topic at hand to talk around it and to elude oneself from culpability or responsibility. That's huge, right? And it's something that we're all taught, right? There's so many traits that and kind of practices and quirks that so many of us are taught and don't realize that it's holding us back in organizing spaces, right? So sometimes you got to be direct and you got to say the thing and you got to lovingly call your friend out and be like, hey, that was freaking racist. So thank you so much, Ivana, for sharing on behalf of the LA New Age spiritual community. I think I learned a little from you. So amazing. I think folks shared some really great approaches, right? Ranging from, I don't know you well, but can at least share information, to I know you very well and I know what'll work and I know what'll change your mind, or at least what conversation and approach you'd be receptive to, right? And that's so huge. That's what we're getting to. Because we have a couple more minutes, I'm going to share like one more very similar prompt. I think for most folks, the kind of approach might be the same, but maybe folks have, some different experiences from this angle. So in a very similar situation, say that your coworker is an outspoken advocate for abortion access and the reproductive justice movement in the United States. But you've also heard them discuss the importance of the US military presence for protecting women in the Middle East from violence, right? Very big post 9/11 invasion of Iraq narrative that we're there to protect Middle Eastern women from this like vague violent Arab ban, right? What's one way someone might approach this person, right? Again, this is someone who considers themselves to some degree a feminist, who considers themselves, aware of reproductive justice, of an issue that includes bodily autonomy and all these things, right? But they're also kind of still drinking a bit of the militarist Kool-Aid. And this is one of the angles that we're especially thinking about as we approach the annual women's marches that are coming up, right? We'll share a link to how we're showing up at the women's marches, right? As anti-imperialist feminists who are bringing our message and pushing our fellow feminists to do better, to be better, to show up for the people of Gaza, right? And a lot of times in these spaces, we do have to be the ones who are like, actually, I'm going to interject as someone who believes that war and militarism are wrong, right? That war and militarism are not the answer to saving Middle Eastern women, right? That's not, the answer to oppression is not bombs. And also it's that narrative is mostly Islamophobic because what do they need to be saved from, right? So anyway, that was my long spiel, but I'd love to hear folks kind of approaches to a conversation of that nature. Yeah, Grace, and then Ivana.
Yeah, I think this goes back to what we were talking about with the first one. Like you said, I think they're very similar, but I think like we have this idea, and I think I've had an idea of this for a long time, where people don't care until it affects them. And I think that like a lot of times that is true, but I think it also, there's this other layer of, like we're saying, people have so much going on in their lives. People are working, people have people that rely on them, they have health issues. There is so much that this country does not provide for the people that inhabit it. And there's so much that can get you so bogged down where you do not have the privilege of education and learning and dealing with this amazing praxis that we have to understand solidarity and what liberation can look like. And I think that really kind of started to change for me when I started talking about this specific topic with my mom, who is a huge reproductive justice advocate, really cares about the rights of women and families and people in this country. And I think that for a while I was angry with her. I was like, why do you only care about people here and yourself and your family and not the people throughout the world? But then I took a step back and I was thinking about her correlation to the healthcare system here, her correlation to the education system here, not being afforded so many of these opportunities to do the work and to see these connections and the investment that we need to have in all peoples throughout the world if we want the liberation for ourselves. So I think coming from that place of love and knowing that my mom has such a deep care for her family and for her community, and that she may just have, like we're saying, some obstacles that got her from point A of having this narrow, specific perspective of the world to where she is now. it really taught me a lot about being accessible and being someone that people can rely on to not judge if they don't have the same maybe like foreground that we do with our anti-war, anti-imperialist feminism. So that's what made that scenario. That's what I thought of when you brought that up.
Thanks so much, Grace. Again, so much of the common theme of tonight is leaning into those relationships, and leaning into the curiosity of getting to know people, right? So much of the work of how do we move people, how do we educate people, how do we teach somebody something is you got to know them, right? If you've ever learned anything about like popular education and Paulo Freire, right? It's about where can you relate, right? How can you first step into that person's experience and their world and what they'd understand or what problem they have, and then how do you make those connections? How do you make them see those connections? I've seen a lot of people say this in as many words in the chat as well, right? If they understand environmentalism or climate change, or they understand reproductive justice, right? Whatever it is that they do get, right? Chances are there is a connection to that thing and militarism and war, right? And so much of the work that we're doing is making those connections, making it so that no movement can be doing its work without talking about Palestine, without talking about war and militarism, right? We show up at Climate Week as the anti-war contingent. We show up at the Women's March as the anti-war contingent, right? We show up at every space, making sure folks are making those connections. And that's exactly also how we talk to our folks. Ivana and then Laura.
I actually had this exact situation, as a matter of fact. And I asked the person, how much do you know about American foreign policy? And I said, did you know that America has overthrown more than 60 governments? And she said, no. And I said, that's like a really important thing to understand, that United States is presenting to us this idea that it's spreading democracy, but it's really not. United States only cares about being a hegemony, being a superpower no matter what. And another thing that is important, I suggested to her, is to consider that we don't live in a democracy. We have elements of democracy. We live in plutocracy, really. And it's really important to understand that and this country is really young, and that not every single country that has been, our history is like 400 years, and there are countries that have been around for, 2 millennia. This system is not going to work for every single country, and we really have to respect that. And so then I went, deeper into really, how Iraqis live right now, that all of it is basically sold to American corporations. They're basically slaves. They have to report, blah, 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 blah. And it was like, I could see in her listening to me and then just for dear life holding on to her belief. It's really difficult, and sometimes we have to explain those things, and people kind of have to sit and marinate. And if we have another opportunity, then just go a little bit further. And another thing I just want to suggest is that I'm an immigrant. I've been living here for 25 years. I'm from Serbia, and I've realized that for immigrants, it is so much easier to understand how indoctrinated people here are by propaganda. And it's really difficult. This year I had a conversation with someone at Burning Man for 5 hours who really explained to me, who's an American, how really this propaganda works here. And it made me have more compassion and understanding and able to speak better to Americans about this. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Ivana. I think so much of that went back to the basics, right? Like, do we understand the concept of democracy that we're being sold? And can we go from there? Because what we're selling is not what we're dishing out. Yeah. So many nuggets of wisdom there from Ivana. We'll close with Laura and then we'll wrap up.
I just to leap off what Jasmine was saying, I think that it's really important to understand that this kind of political work is the work of a lifetime, and that at different stages in life, there are different approaches to the same person, and people have different priorities. When people were in family formation, it's been mentioned, people were taking care of elders, people who are younger versus people who are elders, and yet what you want to inspire in people is an understanding that they have a lifetime of work ahead of them and help them get the tools, and particularly continuing education in whatever form works for them. Videos, access to the website. I think that CODEPINK materials are wonderful for this, but also materials that come out of different cultural experiences, and to be there for people over the course of a lifetime. And because people will be able to wax and wane in the intensity of the work they could do based on their circumstances. And having the long view, I think, adds patience and it helps build.
Absolutely. I think we're here for the long haul. Like you said, folks should be prioritizing how do we build a movement that is resilient, that can sustain us till the future that we want. And I hope that tonight what we've shared are some really helpful examples of how do we get back to the basics, y'all? How do we practice our values of curiosity, openness, and solidarity to make sure that we are moving the people closest to us, right? The people that we have the most possibility to impact, right? So that we collectively as Americans can move the government that we have the closest responsibility to and impact on, right? So that we, the US, can stop being the global warmonger that it is, and that the nations that are under US rule can then maybe see freedom one day. So we really hope that tonight's been useful. I'll definitely pass it back in case Danica or Grace want to share anything. But really quickly, we kind of just wanted to leave you all with a couple examples of, how do you continue the work that we're doing here and what we've talked about. So we will share tonight's recording and slides and a follow-up email if that's helpful for folks who want to revisit or share with their local organizations. We encourage folks to add the values that we talked about tonight to your community norms in the organization that you're in. Revisit, your basic values the way we did at the beginning. Folks should be doing that regularly, right? You should be onboarding folks into your space on the basis of these are the values that we share, right? We encourage folks to refer to our Palestine FAQ on our website for amazing resources and kind of how to have difficult conversations primer about Palestine. We have the latest kind of numbers, statistics, references, and just background information for folks engaging in discourse. We also encourage folks to attend your local Women's March. Like we said, bring the anti-imperialist message to your local Women's March. Hold the feminists closest to you accountable and push them to make sure they're not leaving anybody behind in their feminism. Replicate what we're doing here tonight. Host a teach-in in your community about anti-imperialist feminist values, about how folks can get involved in the movement and how they can be having difficult conversations in the spaces around them. And then finally, encourage your local organizing coalition or collective to practice real solidarity and to take action for Palestine and learn more about the role of the US globally, right? So even if you are primarily a part of a mutual aid group, an abortion fund, a community association, no matter what it is, you could be fighting for and spreading information about Palestine, about US imperialism everywhere you go. And we hope that we gave you some resources. So yeah, Grace, Danica, do you have anything else to close us out with?
I just want to thank everyone so much. I think we heard from a lot of chapter members and chapter leaders tonight, and I think it's just really a testament to, you all do practice these values in your organizing. Like, I know some of you personally, you are kind and loving people, and that's the world that we want to build, a world that is kind and loving and takes care of people. And I think you all do that. And I know sometimes this work and this organizing can feel demoralizing here and there. And sometimes it doesn't feel like we're being effective. But I've seen you bring new people into the movement, and just hearing about how you all have these hard conversations. A lot of people aren't even doing that. So we are moving the needle so slowly, but we're doing it. And I hope you all take some pride or confidence in that. And we are really, really encouraging everyone to community build over the next few months and make sure that our organizations and chapters are ready to give people a movement home when they need it. But yeah, Grace, do you have anything?
Yeah, same thoughts. I just want to express my gratitude to all of you. I think I know what feminism is not because of what I've read and what praxis or what theory and things I've read in books, but it's because of what I see in the community that has been built here in Chicago and throughout the country, and talking to all of you, like Danica said. And I think that's a testament to where the movement is right now and why we have so much of the advancements that we do from these elected officials that we are at the door of every single day. This threat of an arms embargo didn't just come because it came, it became because of the strength of this movement and the strength of Palestinians. And you guys finding the connections in your local communities, connecting you to the same family in Palestine that exists here in your own community. So I'm just really grateful. And I know this work will be fruitful and is fruitful because I reap the benefits and the joy of this movement every single day by hanging out with all of you. So I'm going to post the next steps and resources one more time that Jasmine already talked about, but please find us at women's marches, take our action for what that feminism is not. Feminism is anti-war, and that war is not feminist. And join us next Tuesday on October 22nd. We will have some amazing special guests from throughout the movement talking about feminist co-option and practicing our values. So if you're looking for another space like this to talk about what feminism is and what it isn't, it'll be a great webinar to be doing. So that's all from me.
Thank you, everyone. Have a